Thank you again for coming to the Better Understandings Assessments and Standards for grades K-2. This is going to be our math webinar that we have. So everything we're talking about today is going to be math related. Just to give you a little bit of information about who we are and who we have here today. I'm Heather Jenkins. I will be one of the presenters today along with my colleague Marissa Hooper.
Hi, everyone.
And also, we have Kristen Crawford and Gray Harrington from the Department of Education. They both work on this data coaching contract as well, and may be here as well to be able to answer questions. But you'll hear the bulk of it from Marissa and myself. So. Before we get into too much of the content of the webinar, we want to thank the Department of Education. They're the reason that we're able to do these particular webinars at no cost to you. We're able to get a lot of information out to the state of New Hampshire, and we appreciate our partnership with the Department of Education. You are muted, so you don't have to worry about us hearing you. Um, if you're going to ask questions, if you could please ask them in the Q&A. Like I said, we have quite a few people here today, so it will be helpful for us to be able to monitor the Q&A portion of things. We ask, because we're in a webinar format, for you not to necessarily raise your hand. It's hard for us to unmute you and move forward. So if you could try to type everything into that Q&A, it will be super helpful. You will be getting an email 24 hours plus after this webinar ends. It will include the link to a PD certificate for this webinar, a link to where the video will be up a little bit later this week for this webinar. You'll get the slide deck. One of the things that Marissa and I try really hard to do is give you a lot of resources and links, so you will get access to the slide deck and any other documents that we have for resources. Lastly, at the end, there'll be a brief survey. We look at the results all the time. If you could give us any feedback or let us know of anything else you might want to also start to learn about or understand, we would love to hear from you. Just for today, our targets are, again, we're working with math today, so we want to gain a deeper understanding of the K-2 math standards. We want to talk about developing standards-based assessments or aligning what you have for your current assessments to your grade level standards. In that, also making sure that we're not just assuming because we're using a program that that program is going to align directly to the standards. So just ways to kind of take a look at that and then understand how to analyze that data and ensure that your grade level standards are being met. Just so you know, it is a lot of information. We're going to do our best to be able to give you enough information as to not overwhelm you. But again, we have a lot of links in here. So if you want to be able to look at the information a little bit deeper, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn my video off just so that you have a little bit more room on your screen. And we'll get started on the agenda here. So we're going to talk about learning standards and learning outcomes first. Then we're going to just talk generally about standards-based assessments, collecting and analyzing data, and then again, like I said, the resources and wrap up. So first and foremost, just talking about standards in general and learning outcomes. Our state standards, we have the New Hampshire state standards. We do follow the Common Core. The state of New Hampshire is a Common Core state. So these standards are basically, if we were an architect, these are our blueprints, or an engineer, to be able to make sure that all of our students are understanding or meeting the specifications that we need them to be able to move on to the next grade level. As you all well know, math is a little bit tricky. If we're not getting some of those really core foundational skills in the younger grades, the upper grades are going to have a really hard time. So we want to make sure that we are following those standards because those are universal regardless of our school or our district or the classroom. The curriculum and what we have for curriculum may vary. The standards don't vary. The curriculum might. And so that is sort of the implementation of those standards and making sure that it's all working. So I want to kind of make the distinction here too. The curriculum isn't your teaching. It is what you use to teach the standards and a guide for you to be able to teach the standards. So we do have to do more than just turn the page to the next sort of lesson in our curriculum. We need to really understand it and make sure we're delivering the message to learners in a way that is understandable to them. So again, we talked about the Common Core state initiatives for New Hampshire. So the first thing I want to just talk about, I know this is a K-2 webinar. Just in general, K-8 math standards, in even K-12 for that matter, are internationally benchmark. One of the things that we sometimes forget about when it comes to mathematics is rigor, and making sure that we are understanding how much sort of cognitive rigor or sort of brain power it takes to do specific tasks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. When we're talking about the math standards and sort of a little bit of the shift there as well that we had years ago, is really providing that guidance and conceptual understanding is where it's at. Obviously, we need those procedural skills and fluency and application, but we're really gaining that conceptual understanding so that students can take what they know and apply it to new situations. There are key concepts at each grade level. We'll talk a little bit about those. And obviously, it's a developmental progression. So we want to make sure that things are, accessible to the students at our grade level, and those standards are to ensure that. One thing that a lot of people don't necessarily know about the math standards and just concepts in general is they tend to be in 3-year cycles. So, what might be something that's a major standard or something that's really important in one grade level may not be in the next grade level, or it may not be in the grade level before then, because maybe it's being introduced in one grade level, worked on in the next grade level, and really understood in that third grade level. So, I guess long story short on that is that you don't want to just look at your grade level, but you want to see what comes before it and what comes after it. Obviously, for kindergarten, we don't have much before it, but you do want to look at where they're going from there to know what they need to be prepared for as well. For the key concepts for K-2, we are really looking at those concepts and skills that are related to addition and subtraction. As we move up past grade 2 and we look at grades 3 through 5, they're looking more at the multiplication and division of whole numbers and fractions. We wanted to make sure that we put this in here and then just understanding in general. I think on the next slide we have here is oh, nope, I was thinking it was something else. Sorry. I want to show you the progression. It's coming up in the next couple of slides, but to know that as we're looking at our grade level standards, one of the things that we just want to make sure of is that we're really honing in on just what our grade level is asking, not necessarily what the next grade level up is saying that the kids don't know. Because a lot of times upper grade levels are asking for you to teach more than what your particular grade level standards are. This next slide has to do specifically with the standard algorithm. Super, super, super important for grades K-2, especially you first and second grade teachers that we have here. If you look at where the highlighting is, the standard algorithm for addition or subtraction is not even supposed to be introduced until 4th grade. Now, Marissa and I are on site all the time, and we know that people say, well, how can we do that? We have, parents at home teaching the students the traditional algorithm. We've got our programs seem to be lining everything up. And it's not that it can't be somehow introduced in your teaching, but the premature, I guess, introduction of the standard algorithm for mathematics is causing a huge issue for students in upper grades. So this next slide that we have here, that's coming in are sort of the alternatives to the traditional algorithm. A lot of these things should look familiar also from your programs by using those number bonds or drawing pictures, using 10 frames, pulling out tens and ones. I am a former second grade teacher. I used to line it up. I read the particular standards and it said addition and subtraction in relation to place values. So I thought that meant line it up. And it does not. We don't want them just memorizing a certain procedure. We want them understanding numbers. So big thing is for you folks, no standard algorithm at all. In addition to this, because we really want that conceptual understanding, which again relates back to that standard algorithm and just the memorization of things, we do want rigor. We want things to be, challenging for students without obviously having it be completely over their heads. But the conceptual understanding is number one. We need to make sure that students are understanding those key concepts and able to have flexibility in their thinking outside of your program or outside of your instruction because they understand numbers and they understand how to work with different skills. The procedural skills and fluency are obviously going to help them. We used to say back in the day that like you're not going to be able to walk around with a calculator in your pocket because you're going to have to understand your facts and everything. And that's true. But unfortunately now they do have a calculator in their pocket. And even kids down into the kindergarten, first grade, and second grade sometimes have that. Not that we're going to be having them take out their phones and use their calculator, but you get the idea. The last thing is that application and being able to apply knowledge and put that sort of conceptual understanding and procedural fluency into application. When it comes to reading the standards, we have our domains of math. So here on this page, we have operations and algebraic thinking and measurement and data. We've got more than that, but just to understand, you've got your domains or your reporting categories. And then within that, just so we are on the same page with terminology, we have what are called clusters of standards, and then the actual standards underneath each cluster. When the Common Core math standards were being developed, one of the things that keep going back to that cognitive rigor, they wanted the cognitive rigor of each particular cluster of standards to be relatively equal. And they wanted basically any of the skills or standards that they needed to understand to be able to do, let's say, represent and solve problems involving addition and subtraction. Those two standards are what students need to be able to understand to be able to represent and solve problems involving addition and subtraction. The reason that I harp on this is that we get a lot of questions about, well, why does this cluster only have one standard in it? Or why does this cluster have three standards underneath it or two standards? And it just has to do with the amount of sort of understanding students have to be able to apply their understanding within that cluster. This next one is that domain progression that I was referring to a little bit earlier. You can see kindergarten, you're the only one with counting and cardinality. For first and second grade, you do not have that anymore, right? So you've got the numbers and operations base 10, operations and algebraic thinking, geometry, and measurement and data. We just wanted to show you this. There's a couple of lines that kind of are the delineators here, and that's after fifth grade and between fifth and sixth grade, and in between eighth grade and high school, where things change a little bit. So we just wanted to show you the general progression. Whereas if you hit your down arrow a couple of times, I think it'll have those on there. Perfect. And just so that you can kind of see where things are going to in the progression of the math standards. I know we're all focused on our own, so let's talk about our grade levels. If you don't know about Achieve the Core, um, this is a great website to be able to understand what the major supporting and additional clusters of standards are at every grade level. Now, this is an algebra progression. Basically, what this is saying in grades K through 8, they have these sheets for each particular grade level. And it basically gets students so that as they start ninth grade, they're able to start algebra. Um, there are other progressions out there. Not very many of them are what are used. The algebra progressions tend to be the ones that are the most utilized, which is why we're using Achieve the Core here. I do know that, obviously, we've got a little bit of a shift when it comes to math, specifically for mathematics in high school and what the requirements are for that. The state of New Hampshire is shifting a little bit to be encompassing a little bit more than just algebra, but also geometry and data and statistics and probability. So at some point, these particular documents, they're not exclusive to the state of New Hampshire. They're an Achieve the Core and Common Core standard set of documents, but this basically tells you if you are going to spend time on something when it comes to kindergarten math curriculum, you're going to spend the majority of your time on those green concepts. Those are those major clusters. Those supporting clusters are ones that students need to have an understanding of, and maybe it's going to feed into what they're going to need for first grade as well. And same thing with those additional clusters. But I guess the reason that Marissa and I love these documents so much is it sort of takes the guesswork out. If I'm going to stop and say, my students don't understand these particular skills, do I need to stop or should I keep moving? I would take a look at this and say, oh, okay, it's an additional cluster. I'm going to move on. I know not everybody has it, but we're going to move on to some of those major ones. So this is kindergarten. The next one here is first grade. So you can see what the major clusters supporting and additional clusters are for first grade. You can also on the right-hand side, it might be small on your screen, but you can see what the major work in the grade levels are. And again, it's saying for kindergarten through second grade, it's addition and subtraction concepts and skills and problem solving with place value. You can also see what your required fluency is depending on your grade. So for right here, you can see the required fluency for first grade is to add and subtract within 10. The next one here that we have is second grade. So again, this goes all the way up through eighth grade. And if you, yep, that's perfect, Marissa. If you look at this on the back of each one through Achieve the Core, they show you what the progression is all the way from kindergarten up through eighth grade. So it gives you a little bit of an understanding of what is needed at each grade level. I think this is really helpful. Like if I teach first grade, I can see where they're coming from in kindergarten and where they're going to in second grade. As a second grade teacher, I can see first grade to third grade and so on and so forth. So these have been really helpful in folks being able to figure out if I'm redoing a scope and sequence or I'm trying to figure out what I need to spend more time on, these documents can be super helpful. Standards for mathematical practice. These are, I feel like they're missed a lot. They're the same standards of mathematical practice all the way from K to 12. A lot of programs right now are starting to refer to the mathematical practice standards. They're a big deal. We need to make sure that we're really looking at these. If you just even look at number one, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. That's a lost art for some of these kids, especially as they go up through the grades. Um, the ones that are going to have the most trouble with persevering and problem solving are the kids that come into school and math is really easy for them and they kind of get away with I just know how to do it. They use the standard algorithm, they've got all of these procedural things, and then they get up into a grade where they can't use that anymore. And now they can't persevere because they have no flexibility in thinking in math. So it's huge. You can see them here, a lot of reasoning abstractly, using tools to be able to um, strategically solve problems, modeling with mathematics. Modeling is huge, even for those kids who already know it and they've got it, to be able to show their thinking and model all the way up through, their senior year of high school is huge. So make sure you keep an eye on these and are thinking of these all the time as well, because you don't have enough to think about. But when we talk about standards, we talk about them also in the realm of learning outcomes. If we're thinking about our standards, they sort of result in what we want our students to be able to understand. So, learning outcomes, a lot of people had to put them, your learning outcome on the board or an I can statement on the board. And then, we sort of shifted away from that. Or when we did it, we just did it so that if somebody, our administrator came in, they could check it off on a walkthrough form to say, yep, oh, my learning target is up there. We're talking about more than that. It's more than just posting it on the board. It's making it understandable and basically showing kids the way to have them show their learning. So when students understand what those are, even down to the kindergarten level, they're going to be more successful in their learning. If we talk about this in terms of, what the biggest indicators are for student success, John Hattie's done multiple thousands of analyses on student learning. And one of the number one indicators of student success is students understanding their expectations and that success criteria and those learning objectives. The way to read this graph is basically you want 1 year of growth for 1 year's worth of work. If you're really good at having students understand why they're learning something, where they're going with something, and sort of how to get there and how to be successful at it, you can make up to 1 1/3 years worth of growth with students for a year's worth of work. So learning targets and learning outcomes are really sort of crux of how we're figuring out if students are learning what they need to. So let's just talk generally about the importance of them. Again, it's students and teachers, right? We need to know what needs to be learned and what needs to be applied, and not just assuming because we taught something that everybody understands, where their learning is and how to be successful with that. That's our roadmap, right? Um, it helps students understand the why. It can help you guide your instructional decisions, and they're the basis of all assessments. If you have an assessment, you need to know what the learning outcome is for that and not just photocopy it and put it in front of kids and not really know the why or what it's being mapped to. Again, everything has to do with your grade level standards and those progressions. Want to just talk a little bit more about how we can use those learning outcomes to guide instructional decisions and the use of assessment. So, our learning outcomes. So let's just take, we used a grade one example here, a grade one standard. It's a numbers and operations base 10 standard that talks about comparing two-digit numbers, right? We're looking at that when it comes to understanding tens and ones, and then recording our results with the appropriate symbols. So obviously, the students need to know what the greater than symbol is, less than symbol is, or equal to symbol is. That makes sense. They also need to understand a little bit bigger concept of that, like we were saying with that place value. What are the tens? What are the ones? How can we compare them? Which number, that has more tens is the larger number, regardless if the ones are higher or not. Just kind of understanding that where the number is matters. And then what they'll be able to do in the application of those skills is to decompose those, just like we were showing with the number bonds a little bit earlier. Um, we can have a number that's decomposed into the tens and then the ones. So if we've got 26, it's composed of 20 and 6. So two tens and six ones. So, what are the learning outcomes for this, right? So, what do we need students to be able to be successful with? Um, this is all of it. I mean, it's a lot just for one particular standard, right? So, the sort of big news on this is a lot of times we have our programs. They tell us what standards are attached to whatever particular lesson we are doing. And it is our job to make sure that we're really honed in on what it needs to be done by the end of this particular lesson or the end of this unit. Where are we going, right? We want that particular road to not be completely straight, but as close to straight as possible rather than veering off from side to side because we aren't really sure what we want our students to be understanding. Um, you're teaching something, you get the deer in the headlights, and you think, okay, I need to keep going on this because I'm getting the deer in the headlights. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's okay to have the deer in the headlights because that's not the full sort of need of this particular lesson. So we want to make sure that we're really understanding that. Um, Go ahead, Marissa. That's great. This is sort of what I'm, getting to in my talking is we want to be able to understand the standards, but what is the intent of it? And what are some of those understandings and how deep of an understanding do students have to be able to understand something? Especially in the younger grades, what we tend to do is we say they already have it. Let's move on. Maybe we need to move on to another grade level. Maybe we need to do something harder. No, not necessarily. A lot of times, what we really need to do is go deeper. And that sort of lends itself now to what we have for the next couple of slides, which is talking a little bit in general about depth of knowledge. We hear about DOK, it has to do with rigor. This is just a general overview of what depth of knowledge levels we have at each grade level. You can kind of see the level one's recall, level two skills and concepts, level three strategic thinking, and level four is extended thinking. This next slide has to do specifically with math and what it means to have, to recall information for math, some of the keywords that you might have and some of the things that students are doing when they are solving problems at a specific depth of knowledge. We're going to talk a little bit more about depth of knowledge coming up in the next section or the section after that to just kind of show you a little bit of understanding. But the biggest thing for depth of knowledge is depth of knowledge four is not necessarily more important than depth of knowledge one, two, or three. They need to have understanding of the depth of knowledge one and two things to do depth of knowledge three. So it's not that we want to spend all our time on DOK 3 and 4. We have to spend some time on DOK 1 and 2, but we need to make sure we aren't just staying in depth of knowledge 1 and 2. Any questions, Marissa, along the way?
Yeah, one I was able to answer in the Q&A. Another question was regarding locating the Common Core standards. So what I was I'm talking about the next section. So I'm gonna have Heather use her laptop since I'm presenting to send you a link. The last question was about some recommendations for students who are struggling with a particular concept. We're not getting much into that today. We're more talking about standards and assessments in the classroom. But what I will send you our email because we do have a ton of resources and other webinars that address that question. Maybe not specifically to that standard, but some things you can do within your classroom and resources that we have. So, Heather, I'll have you type back to those two people if that's okay. So
Absolutely.
I'll be presenting the next section.
And some of it, Stephanie, just so you know, some of the resources that we have are going to help you with that too, because we're going to talk about some tasks and things like that. But I'm specifically thinking about number talks, so I'll give you a link to that. I'll give it to everybody. Both those links to everybody.
Great. Okay, we're going to now move into the assessment portion of this webinar and talk about some standards-based assessments. So the word assessment can be sort of tricky when we're thinking about 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. I'm currently working with a K-2 school, and we're looking at assessment data for our students, and it can be really uncomfortable because I haven't taught kindergarten, but I can only imagine, teaching these young students and giving them these types of assessments can feel like we're not doing them good service. However, we're here to tell you today that even in grades K1 and 2, that assessment is still a critical piece to student learning. And what we just want to talk about is more that what we're trying to get from students is to figure out what they know and how they learn best. That's going to help us better help students in the long run. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of assessments that's appropriate for kindergarten, first, and second graders. So a few sort of key details on why assessments are critical in these grades. The first is we want to be able to identify early understanding of number sense. As Heather stated, for the standards and the focus areas for K-2, that addition, subtraction, number sense is such a big piece to that. So when our K-2 students are building concepts of counting quantity, place value, and assessments, and operations, we need to make sure that we can identify where they're at in their understanding. And when we give these types of assessments, we're able to reveal the misconceptions that students have. Sometimes we're not always able to do that with the different ways that we might structure our classroom. So these sorts of assessments will bring that out in our students. As students are moving through the grade levels, Heather was a K-2 teacher. I taught middle school and work with a lot of middle schools. The gaps that students are not only coming in with in kindergarten as that sort of, where what they're exposed to at home is different than it used to be. And then them moving up through the grade levels, those gaps are getting larger and larger. And so we need to make sure that in the earlier grades that we're providing any sort of early interventions for students that are going to help prevent those gaps later on in compounding in later grades. It also helps us as teachers inform our day-to-day instruction. We're able to determine, what students might need some reteaching, extra practice, or maybe what students are ready for a bigger challenge. It will help us with grouping and pacing and also choice of strategies. Sometimes assessments are best when we want to see what sort of strategies students are using and not so much for a grade or anything like that, but we want to know what strategy are they using and is that something they can share. And it also becomes a feedback loop instead of separate events. So we don't like to think of assessment as, just this one-time isolated event. It is a loop of instruction, assessment, feedback, instruction, assessment, feedback. And students are getting into this sort of cycle where they can learn, show what they know, and then get some feedback on that. This is going to help monitor their growth over time. And by introducing this early, students are going to be able to, as they progress through the grade levels, be more confident in assessments. Test anxiety is definitely a thing. And so if we can make it so assessment is something that is early on, it's going to help them develop in this area throughout their school years. It's going to also help them with their confidence and strategy development. And then one thing we also just want to just touch upon is the fact that we don't only want to look at like a proficiency score, we also want to make sure we're looking at growth measures. We want to make sure that students in these early grades are showing growth and making growth. And so that is just as important, if not more important, than how they're particularly doing on a concept or skill. And just some other things supporting mathematical thinking and problem solving, again, revealing how students think and not just their answers. So it's critical that we have assessments that are going to not just be multiple choice, not just ask for an answer, but that's going to reveal how students are thinking and what strategy that they're using. It will also help with the family communication and build a positive math identity early. Again, we're trying to highlight what students can do. Sometimes it's easy to jump to what they're struggling with or what they can't do yet, but we want to focus on what they can do, give that feedback for it'll help with their confidence, persistence, and that willingness to try. And again, like I said, reducing that fear of math tests later on in schooling. So, the type of assessments we're talking about for K-2 that are really the most valuable to both you and students are observational checklists, math interviews and conferences with students, any sort of performance task that involves manipulatives. Formative assessments are critical during activities, and that can be those checklists, interviews. Formative assessment is sort of a big umbrella of a lot of things that can be happening there. Some quick exit tickets or games with students. Again, those are some more formative assessments. And then some work samples and math talk. So as you can see here, we didn't list that sort of standard like end of unit assessment. A lot of this is grade level appropriate for the students that are in front of you. So we want to make sure that there's less emphasis that's placed on those, long written tasks. When we think about learners in K-2, they're going to show their understanding best through talking, showing, modeling, and playing with math. So just to give you a little bit of background about the different assessment types, that can be sort of confusing on what assessments we're giving and why. So the first one we just want to let you know about screeners. Whenever you have a screener, because K-2 does not do the New Hampshire SAS state assessment. So some of the assessments you're doing in those grade levels, those local assessments through iReady or Dibbles or NEWA, whatever it might be, these might be some of the different purposes so that you know what to do with that information when you get it. So for screeners is looking to identify or predict students who might be at risk. Okay, so any sort of screener that you're doing would be to identify those students who might be at risk for poor learning outcomes. Some benchmarks that would be to evaluate students' knowledge and skills that is relative to a set of longer term learning goals. So we want to think about, where students are at within a particular learning goal that we have for them. So we can benchmark and give a benchmark assessment to determine that. Formative assessments, that's going to inform our teaching, our everyday teaching. Even a conversation you have with a student could flip and change up what you do for the rest of your class. And so any sort of formative assessment is not only going to inform your teaching, but support student learning. And the critical piece here is while learning is still happening. So we want to make sure we're giving any sort of we're providing what students need in the moment while they're still learning, and so that they're not, getting stuck with skills and practicing them incorrectly and getting to a point that you're trying to then undo something. So it's more in the moment. In the summative assessments, we evaluate and measure student learning at the end of an instructional period. So you might be doing, depending on, how things are structured in your classroom, you might be doing less of the summative assessments. They're still important, even in grades K-2, just as long as you're doing it appropriately, that they're still very important for these grade levels. So when we think about developing and aligning assessments with standards, some of you might have a program and some of you might not, and you might be designing your own assessments. Or you might, be using something, um, or your curriculum might not cover a specific set of standards, so you have to either design an assessment or find an assessment. We wanted to give just a few tips and tricks that's sort of critical to ensuring that your assessments are aligned to standards and your grade level standards. So first, always plan backwards. We started with the standards and the learning outcomes because that's what we should always start with. What are our standards? What are our learning outcomes? We're going to establish our success criteria for students, and we want to make sure that whatever our assessment is, it aligns to those. So we need to name them first. We want to make sure we scaffold our assessments. We want to address those varying levels of depth of knowledge. We want to make sure that students, regardless of where they are, have access points for students. As Heather stated, depth of knowledge 3 and 4 is no better than 1 and 2. What's important is that students have access to all of the depth of knowledge level questions and they're progressing through them. So, depth of knowledge 1 and 2 is still very important as long as we're still giving them depth of knowledge 3 and 4. Varying the method. So this is sort of what we touched upon, and we're going to talk a little bit of continuing throughout this section, is that whatever method we're giving to students to show their understanding. So whether that's explaining, showing, and modeling, maybe it is pencil and paper for the student. We want to make sure that we're varying this so students are able to show what they know in the way that they can. We also want to make sure that our assessments are actionable. To get an assessment back and to just see that a student, got 3 out of 4 questions correctly, that doesn't really do much for me as a teacher. We want to make sure that, ooh, if 20% of my students um, did not, or let me say 50% of my students did not um, understand this question and use a strategy that worked for them, then I need to know what to do next with my classroom. So making sure that we are using assessments and questions that will show student responses and what they can and cannot apply. So we have some links here for you. These are some downloadable templates. Um, and they're also for if you are ever building assessments together for common assessments. There are links here. You can click into them. They're great for designing any sort of assessment. They're for formative, but you can definitely use them for summative as well. Now, if we currently have an assessment, we also want to make sure that this assessment aligns to grade level standards. If you have a curriculum, there are, curriculums out there that are, they have units in them where they're different grade level standards. And so we want to make sure that whatever you do with these assessments, that you are teaching the expectations of your grade level. So if you are currently using an assessment, these are just some steps you can do to make sure that it is appropriate for your grade level. So the first is to identify the learning outcomes for the unit, like we said, just even if you're designing. And you want to take time to analyze the existing assessment. So figure out what your learning outcomes are and then take a look at the assessment and do some content review. Next, you want to match the assessment items to standards. So even when I was doing this example, going through looking at the assessment, going through question one, what standard does this address? Going through question two, what standard does this address? And it can get tricky because it says it's aligned to standards, but then it can be sort of hard to to find the standard that it's aligned to. So doing this work and doing this work with other members, so doing it collaboratively is also huge and helpful for this particular practice. So we want to make sure that it's aligned and we want to check for coverage. Does this assessment have all um, cover all standards in this unit, or does it just cover some standards? Once we do that, you can assess for depth of knowledge and grade level appropriateness. So, what sort of questions are we asking of students? Is it appropriate? And what depth of knowledge is this question? And then we want to make sure, again, we're varying those learning modalities. So, what sort of questions are we asking of students? Are students able to access these questions? Is there any sort of thing that's hindering them from being able to do so? So, we have a quick example here for an illustrative math. It's grade one, unit three. So, this is just an example of what we're talking about. If our unit is adding and subtracting within 20, these are the clusters that we're covering. And some standards. They're not all listed here as there was a lot of standards in this unit. So I just chose some. It would have been like 5 pages long. And again, some of that success criteria. What are we asking of students? And so we want to make sure we're analyzing the assessment, and then we want to match the assessment items to standards. So starting a spreadsheet, this is, like I said, Unit 3, grade 1, what standards are these aligned to? And it wasn't super straightforward. So it's important that if your uh, program is not letting you know what standard the question is aligned to do some of that work so you can really get a good idea of what we're asking of students. And then we want to assess for that depth of knowledge and grade level appropriateness. Going through this assessment, there was only depth of knowledge levels one and two in the first few parts of it. So it's important that if this is what we're asking of students, we need to make sure again we're giving them depth of knowledge levels 3 and 4 as well. And what's the question type? Multiple answer, find the unknown, open-ended. We want to make sure we're varying this. Again, giving students manipulatives to be able to show their thinking, being able to explain their thinking. We don't want to lose what we said earlier, which is students show their understanding best by talking, modeling, playing. So giving them the opportunity, even with a kind of assessment that you might be using for a program, is important. And these are just some questions to consider. Um, at thinking, are our tasks varied in rigor and depth of knowledge? Does this item assess the entire standard or only part of the standard? And it doesn't assess it in a way that's different than you usually teach. So that's important as well. We need to make sure that students are able to transfer their knowledge. So it's actually good when we ask students questions in a different way. Um, Asking ourselves if there's any bias in the item or task. Is it single or multi-step? And just so you know, even if it's a multi-step problem, does not automatically make it a depth of knowledge level 3. So it's important to ask yourself that, but also take into consideration depth of knowledge. The language complexity, of course, plays a role. And then is the assessment assessing the intended targets? So thinking about that rigor and depth of knowledge, we have some links here. Um, New Hampshire SAS, which we don't have for grades K1, 2, but some of the resources that New Hampshire SAS has is it has these um, performance level descriptors. So we have linked here. What it gives you is the standard and a depth of knowledge 1, 2, and 3, and what that looks like for that standard. So when you get the slide deck, you're able to click the link and you'll have access to all of the standards for kindergarten and those depth of knowledge, what it looks like at each depth of knowledge. Same for grade 1 and grade 2 we have here. And sorry, I'm going a little quick. I know we're sort of running low on time. Um, but some barriers to demonstrating that understanding through assessment. Um, you know, figuring out what a student knows, that can be limited if we're only confined to a single modality. So making sure that we are switching up and giving students different opportunities. Conversation in math is just as important as computation. I know that can be difficult. I have a nephew in kindergarten who doesn't want to talk about math ever. But making sure that we're giving students the opportunity to talk about what they're doing and what they're modeling and what they're seeing is just as important as, paper and pencil computation. Flexibility for instruction and assessment is found in the verbs. So the entry points, we want to make sure students have an entry and access point for any sort of task that we're asking of them. And you can use those K-2 standard progressions to scaffold instruction towards the grade 3 PLDs. So as Heather stated, it's always important to know where students are coming from and where they're going. So we've linked the grade 3 performance level descriptors here. Um, we have it for science, math, and ELA. But you can take a look at these to see where students are going with their learning. And then ways to assess beyond paper and pencil. Observations with students. You can do small group, whole class, or one-to-one. And you can have some checklists and spreadsheets to help, write down the information that you're seeing. It is important to collect that data. Any sort of small group instruction can use rubrics to observe and listen. Interviews with students over a specific time period for a particular skill you might be monitoring. And of course, technology use, screencasting or recording apps, depend on whether you have Chromebooks or iPads, whatever it might be, to help record those responses, writing and drawing and so forth. And we just wanted to add this in about assessment mapping, making sure that your grade level standards are covered in all of your assessments. Sometimes when you use a curriculum, they can have a unit that is part of a different grade level. So if you decide to skip that unit, know that that means you're skipping it for another grade level and vice versa. So you could be missing standards within your particular curriculum. So you want to do some sort of assessment mapping that allows for you to see what assessments cover what standards. And this is just a last slide of effects on planning and using assessment, what it's going to do for students and what it's going to do for you as an educator, right? We always want to we're always trying to make our job easier. So this can help you do that. Although it does take some time, for sure, you do have that once you've made it through your assessments. So it's going to inform your teaching. It's going to ensure that you use the right evidence for the right purposes. So sometimes you can get evidence, not sure how to use that data for students. So assessments is the start of that. You'll be able to improve your skills in critique and revising assessments, having deeper knowledge of current student understanding, which will help you make more informed instructional decisions. And the outcome we're looking for, of course, is that improved student learning. I saw a lot of things in the chat. Um,
I think we're good to go on that. I answered most of the questions there,
okay.
so you can keep going on the next section. And I will do my resources and wrap up pretty quickly, so you don't have to go too fast if you don't want to.
Okay. Well, luckily, don't worry, this section isn't too long. This is just if you have your assessments, you're collecting that data. Here's how we can here's the best way for a grade level to utilize that data. You want to make sure that it's compiled and accessible to everybody who needs it so they know how students are doing. It should be represented in a spreadsheet or understandable graphic. So we want to make sure that whatever decision we're trying to make on whatever data we've collected for whatever kind of assessment, we need to, in order to do something with that information, we need to understand what we're looking at. We need to make sure that data is explained and understood by everyone who is looking at it. It's visual and it's explicitly aligned to standards and proficiencies. And this is a big one, especially if there's more than one educator on a grade level team, that any calibration or scoring criteria is established. That is a big thing you should do with any of the teams that you have. So when you are formatting any assessment data and collecting it, it's important to include part of the question on this spreadsheet for reference, to include the standards, and include a column for the number of points for each question. So what we mean by that is this is an example of a spreadsheet um, for a module 4 assessment. And if you can see here that in the first question, we're asking students to do four different things. We're asking them to determine who is correct. They need to explain using numbers, pictures, and words. So we want to make sure that however we're assessing them, that we can make it actionable so we know what to do with that information. So if we just say they got a 3 out of 4 for this question or 2 points, whatever it might be, well, what information does that give me? So we see that it's aligned to the specific standards. Were they able to access each part of the question and able to do that part of the question?
And I just want to just reiterate there, this is one of the biggest things that we see as issues for people when they're looking at data, specifically in the younger grades, is they aren't necessarily honing in on what students are understanding and what they aren't. So even though this seems like a lot of information, it can be super helpful in really being able to help inform your instruction. So you want to be doing this with your teams and making sure that you're all correcting things in the same way and looking at things in the same way so you can make a difference in understanding.
Perfect. And then we just have some examples of some checklists and rubrics that you can use with students for that data collection. Again, this is that assessment piece as well. What you're trying to understand is where students are at in their thinking and what strategies they're using, and then how to help them with the next steps. So these are some other ways that you can do that from your end, and some more rubrics and checklists here that we have for you. So I think Heather was going to take over. Do you want me to just quickly go through it, or you want to still take over?
You can quickly go through it. I think we've just got
Okay.
a minute or two to go through. This first resource that we have 5 resources that we wanted to share with you. A couple of them are Achieve the Core, same as what we were talking about before, but this is a coherence map. So a lot of times people are looking for, well, where is this skill coming from? What do they need to know before this? Where is this skill going? This coherence map for Achieve the Core can be super helpful in understanding where, standards are. You can even see in the screenshot that we have here, it's a 4th grade standard that we're showing here, but you can see just in general where things are coming from. Marissa, if you just click on it real quick, um, it will bring up this site and then you just click Get Started. You choose whatever grade level you're thinking of, whatever standard that you would like, and then you map that standard, and it gives you basically the prerequisites and what's coming next. Super helpful in understanding. It also has some tasks and a couple of little materials so that you can kind of understand the standard a little bit better. The next one that we have here are just the commonly misunderstood standards. These are pretty self-explanatory. We did a webinar on this in general. A lot of it has to do with using the standard algorithm a little bit early. And for some reason, Marissa, it takes a while to show up. If you just scroll to the bottom, no kindergarten ones, just for first grade and second grade, and they're pretty self-explanatory. They kind of tell you where the pitfalls are and why things should be taught in different ways. So that can be super helpful. This Lexile Quantile Hub, this is something the state of New Hampshire sponsors for every teacher in New Hampshire. Specifically here, when you log in, you'll be going straight to, if you want to, I don't know if you want to log in, but into the tools here. The tools drop down. Yep. And then there's a math skills database. This is super helpful for saying this is a standard I want to look at. This is what my students we're working on here. I need something to help reteach. I need to know where they're coming from or what prerequisite skills there are or where I can go from here. Down on the bottom, there's three little prerequisite supporting and impeding skills. And those are just activities that have been vetted to be able to say these are some of the things that we can use to be able to help teach this standard or to assess with a little bit of a formative assessment or what have you. Um, you do have to sign up, but it is free. The state of New Hampshire pays for that for you. All you need to use is your teacher email address. And then there's two more. One of them, this is for upper level students, and this helps, a lot of people say, well, what do I do with my kids that are really already getting it? How do I deepen their understanding? And open middle is great for that. It is also great in just anybody understanding flexible thinking. You choose your grade level. Most of it has to do with open tasks. That's why it's called open middle. So basically, it gives you a set of directions, and then it will give you an answer, it will give you a hint. These are great things for students to do to just extend their thinking. So this is a great website for that. And then the last one that we're looking at is this Magic School. It's just one of the AI tools. It is free. Um, you can sign up for free, and it's got a whole bunch of just general information. One of the things that Marissa and I like in here, you can ask Raina. She's like an AI educator thing, which is great. But there's a standards unpacker. There is if I'm teaching students this particular skill and they're not getting it, what else can I do to be able to help them understand? It's just kind of an all-encompassing AI tool. Um, I have not checked. The state of New Hampshire is not necessarily recommending that you use AI in Magic School. It's just something that Marissa and I have found to be really helpful as a general understanding. It has a lot with depth of knowledge questions and things like that as well. All right, we have this same webinar for ELA is coming up next week. And then we also have a workshop that's coming up in the end of January, which is the power of good data, strengthening assessment for all learners. That's a full day workshop in the Concord area. If you just click on the link once you get these slides, you can it brings you right to the Demonstrated Success website, and you can click to be able to register for any of the webinars and workshops. Once you log off, there'll be a quick little, I think it's 5 questions. Please let us know how we're doing. I know we went over already by 5 minutes, which is very unlike us, but we did today. It was probably me talking in the beginning. Anyway, we appreciate you all being here. The next slide just has our general information. You can reach out to Marissa or myself if you have anything. And we will go from there. There's a question about grades 3 through 5. We did not do this exact webinar for grades 3 through 5, but understanding standards grade 3 through 5 is on our YouTube. If you just type in demonstrated success YouTube, there's a 3 to 5 standards presentation that might be helpful for you.